my lovely bookish friends, and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to be showing you my favourite books that I read in 2022. Now, I read a lot of really good books last year. I was so happy with the amount that I managed to read and that I managed to continue reading a lot, because I mentioned, I think before, that it wasn't until 2021 even that I actually started really reading again for myself and just reading fiction, because before that I was doing my degree and my master's degree, and so I was reading a lot of non-fiction and academic reading, so I hadn't actually been just reading for enjoyment. So I only started that in 2021, and so I'm really happy that I managed to keep that up and keep up with all that reading in 2022, and also that I was able to share these books with you as well on this channel, which was amazing. So let us get to my favourite books of 2022.
The first book on this list, which is actually my top 10, I whistled it down to my top 10 books with much difficulty, is The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. This is a best-selling Chinese boys' love novel which has recently been translated into English. It follows Wei Wuxian, who was once the titular Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, but the martial arts world turned against him and he was killed. Years later, his soul is resurrected into another man's body, and he and his former friend from an opposing clan seek out the truth about the events that led to his death. I loved this novel, and I already knew going into it that I would like it, as the novel was adapted into an international smash hit Chinese drama, The Untamed, which I have seen multiple times and adore. However, in China, gay characters are not allowed on TV, so the BL elements were not shown, though they were strongly hinted at. So reading the book was very interesting, as to see what they changed and took out, and to actually see the love story that I was rooting for in the TV series. I will say that if you have not watched martial arts or Chinese historical dramas, then some of the wording and world building might take some getting used to. If you are considering reading this and haven't seen the show, I would actually suggest seeing that first, as it will help you understand what's going on a lot easier. Next up we have The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd-Jones. I have talked about this book quite a bit on this channel, so it probably comes as no surprise that it is on here. This follows our axe-swinging heroine Rin, who is a gravedigger who protects her town from the bone houses, which are like walking skeletons. When these bone houses start to attack her town, Rin and a new arrival set off on a quest to find a magical cauldron that will put a stop to the madness. That description doesn't really do the book justice. I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I have said this many times, but it felt like a dark fairy tale. I loved the way it was written. I also read last year The Drowned Woods, which is another standalone novel set in the same world, which I also enjoyed. The writing is just as captivating. I really recommend this one if you are after a fun YA standalone fantasy read. Next we have Agnes Gray by Anne Bronte. This follows the story of Agnes Gray as she goes through the ups and downs of being a governess. I read this novel for the first time last year and loved it. It was so wholesome. Anne Bronte is definitely my favourite of the Bronte sisters. I love the way she writes. She was a feminist ahead of her time, and her male characters, particularly the love interest in this, are so much better than in her sister's works. No creepy Heathcliff or mad wives locked up in the attic. I really recommend this classic for anyone who wants to start reading classics, as it's short and quite an easy to read. Up next is How Do You Live? This tells the story of Copper, a young boy who begins to question the world around him, and his uncle who helps answer his questions. This is going to be the next Studio Ghibli movie, and I am so excited for it. Reading the book, I could almost envision what the movie would be like. It felt like a Ghibli movie as I read it. It was just so wholesome. And it has just reminded me of another book that should have been on this list, but I totally forgot. Another piece of Japanese literature which was called The Forest of Wool and Steel, which was an amazing book which I got out from the library about this guy who wants to become a piano tuner. Both these two books are similar, not just because they're Japanese translations, but they don't have much in terms of plot, but a lot in terms of heart. My heart felt full after reading these two books. I adore them both. A change in genre, we have If We Were Villains. Now, I have a reading vlog where I fangirl over this book, so I'll just try and keep this short. This follows a group of 7 friends in this elite Shakespeare specialist drama school who embody in many ways the characters that they play on stage in their daily lives. When one of their friends is murdered, the remaining face their greatest acting challenge yet, to convince the police and themselves that they are innocent. This was the first dark academia book that I read, and I really enjoyed it. Before I was an author, I was actually an actress, and I did my degree and masters in theatre. So to be honest, I think a lot of the reason why I enjoyed this book, I think that was quite a lot of the reason why I enjoyed this book so much. The Shakespeare references and the little details about dress rehearsals and stuff just made me think of my time at university, minus the murder of course. This novel is very well written and clever. I did guess the main plot twist and the murderer early on, which may have been the point, or maybe I'm just good at guessing plot points. Either way, it didn't spoil my enjoyment overall, hence why it ended up on my favourites list. Moving on to another YA standalone, we have The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. This is a retelling of a Korean legend and follows Minna, who takes the place of her brother's beloved and sacrifices herself to become the bride of the sleeping sea god. I'm just going to leave you with that. I read this book in one sitting and absolutely loved it. It's like Spirited Away meets a Korean drama, 2 of my favourite things in one. It was easy, fun, and just a magical read. It was very YA fantasy, the love story moved a bit too quickly, but I loved it and it was what I needed, and as such it ranks quite highly on my faves of 2022. Another YA standalone that I loved was Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. Now, Margaret Rogerson is one of my favourite authors. I have really enjoyed all the books she has written so far, and this one did not disappoint. It follows our main girl, whose name I'm not sure how to pronounce, who is training to be a Grey sister, a nun who deals with the dead and the spirits of the undead. When her convent is attacked, she awakens a revenant, this ancient spirit. With its power, she sets off to try and save her people from an ancient evil, so long as the revenant doesn't betray her first. This book was so much fun. Our main girl is so antisocial and socially awkward, like I relate, and I love her for it. It is a standalone, but I'm kind of hoping for a sequel, as it ends with room for one. Everything wraps up, but there are still a few unanswered questions that could lead to more, if that makes sense. I will say that this isn't a romance. She is training to be a nun, and that's not something that she just throws off when she meets the rather complicated male lead. It's more like an enemies to friends kind of thing, which I'm all up for and would like to see more in future books. I feel like the friendship tropes, just there's not enough done with them, and I love them. Next up, we move to middle grade and to The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is another book that I have a reading vlog for. This follows the boy called Bod, whose parents are murdered by this mysterious man called Jack. Bod escapes to the local graveyard, where the ghosts who live there raise him. Oh, this book is incredible. It's so heartfelt and wholesome. It really is just a wonderful read, and it's so wonderfully written. I really do recommend giving this one a read. It's almost so good that I don't know what to say about it. It's just pick it up. You won't regret it. Second to last, we have Half a Soul, which is a book that I love so much that I read twice. First on Kindle, and then I bought the original self-published edition. Then the novel got traditionally published, so I got that, and then it got a Fairy Loot special edition, so I got that as well. As you can see, I'm a big fan of this novel. It follows Dora, who, after a run-in with a fae when she was a child, ends up with only half a soul, which means she doesn't really feel emotions properly and is a bit of an oddball. She goes to London with her cousin and ends up getting mixed up with the Lord Sorcerer, and together they deal with this magical plague of sorts. I may have explained that badly. This book is just good fun. It's like a Jane Austen romance with magic. What can be better? And it's a clean romance, unlike many books that include fae. This is like Jane Austen appropriate for the time romance. It's light-hearted. Dora is a little weirdo who I really warmed to. It gave me similar to vibes as to Howl's Moving Castle gives me whenever I read that book, where the story is just pure magical enjoyment, but it makes me feel good, and this is sometimes all that you need in a good book. That having been said, my favourite book that I read in 2022 was The Book Thief. Now, I'm just going to read you the blurb as I want to make sure I do this justice and don't want to give too much away. Here it goes. Here is a small fact. You are going to die. 1939. Nazi Germany. The country is holding its breath. Death has never been busier. Liesl, a 9-year-old girl, is living with a foster family in Himmel Street. Her parents have been taken to a concentration camp. Liesl steals books. This is her story, and the story of the inhabitants of the street when the bombs begin to fall. Some important information. This novel is narrated by Death. Yup, we went from light-hearted fun to a book narrated by Death. This book destroyed me. It's the only book that I've ever cried whilst reading, and I did not just cry, I sobbed. Absolutely sobbed. I had to call my mom and my sister in order to calm down from this book. It was so amazingly good. I will say that this is 100% the best book I have ever read, and I stand by that. It was so cleverly and beautifully written. Honestly, I cannot praise this book enough. And I feel like this book is not appreciated enough on booktube and booktok. Like, everyone has just forgotten about this devastating and beautiful masterpiece. The author is a genius. The way Death narrates is so well done. I will never stop praising this book. It was the first reading vlog for this channel, and that made the experience of reading it even more magical. It just, I don't even know what to say. Just read this book. It is hard-hitting and you will laugh and most likely cry, but it is so worth it.
Yes, so in the end, The Book Thief just became my favourite book of last year, even though I read some amazing books, including Song of Achilles, that didn't make the list just because of when I was shooting and stuff, because I read that actually quite near the end of the year. However, nothing could beat The Book Thief. Also, the first reading vlog to go up on this channel, so it feels like we've come a bit full circle with this being my favourite book of the year. And I just love it. I shall be treasuring this book forever. So what were your favourite books that you read in 2022? Please let me know in the comments below so I can find books to add for my TBR list, because I love doing that. And yes, so that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing, as I have a lot more bookish content to come this year. And so, until next time, my lovely bookish friends, bye!